Well, growing up, you've probably heard or even played the game Jenga as a child. It's a simplistic game, a fun game. You take these little wooden blocks and to start the game, you stack them up in an ordered way to kind of build this tall tower. And then from there, after one player will remove one of the blocks from that tower. Things will start to get a little wobbly. You keep going until one person finally removes a block from the tower that causes just cataclysmic failure and the entire structure falls to the ground. And all the kids shout Jenga. It's a very fun game. I thought about that this week because in some ways that is the game that is a microcosm of the game we play as Western culture today. We are a culture that is founded on the building blocks and principles of the Judeo-Christian worldview. And the reality is that many of the principles and the ethics that even non-Christians love and celebrate to this day come from that Judeo-Christian worldview. Things like honesty, Christian love and charity, equality, or the individual value of people regardless of their net positive on economies. People are valuable. Even if you don't have the slightest understanding of where these ideals come from, you probably like them. You probably see the overall net benefit of those values on society. But there are other principles and ethics of the Christian worldview that non-Christians reject or even go so far as to call evil and hateful. For example, our sexual ethic constantly gets blasted in the culture today. Or the exclusivity claims of the Christian gospel that Jesus is the only way to salvation. Those things are labeled as hateful or hurtful. We should just kind of pull those things away from the fabric of our culture and we would be better for it, is what some people think. And so what society does, they try to play Jenga. They try to pull away things like our rejection of a homosexual lifestyle, but keep in place the love ethic because that thing feels good to us. They try to remove what they call our patriarchal worldview, but they still want equality for all people, and so they try to play the game. They pull away what they dislike while they try to maintain the elements they approve of, at least for now, until those parts get removed too. All the while, they don't realize that these blocks they desire to pull away are the very foundation stones on which all of this as a culture is built upon. And they do not work exclusive of each other. And I say all that because here in these 10 words in the 10 Commandments, God is building up for us the tower of ethics. He's starting the game, so to speak, of building the tower that we're going to build our culture upon. He starts, as we all do, by laying these foundational pieces that we find in these 10 words. And this morning we stand with Moses and the Israelites at the base of the mountain in the wilderness, hearing the very voice of God. I want to set the stage for this one by reading a passage from just a chapter earlier in Exodus 19, verses 17 through 19. It's going to be on the screen for you this morning. It says, "Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. And they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. And the smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of a trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered in thunder." We talked last week about how the 10 words have often become kind of background noise in our culture today. We know them, we think we know them, but when you try to pull them back in memory, you realize how fuzzy they actually are for us. But when these words were first spoken, they were not soft. They came with a voice that sounded like booming thunder from heaven. So much so that it says at the end of the 10 Commandments, the Israelites are terrified out of their mind hearing the voice of God. It is scary to encounter that reality. This thundering voice of God has a message for us this morning as well, a message that is foundational for all of us to hear in this world. It's foundational in that it might be the most difficult thing for us to set. I was talking to Garrett earlier, and they were out doing work at our new property yesterday, and they were setting the post for this little porch system we're going to have. Thank you guys so much for doing all that, by the way. But Garrett was saying how it was difficult to kind of auger down to get those post holes set because the rock inside there was making it difficult, and it would spin the auger and it'd smack you in the leg, and so you had to work it against himself. It's difficult to set a foundation. You have to tear a lot of things out that don't belong to put the thing that needs to go in the ground for safety. But it's also foundational, in that when we set this one rightly, the others will naturally follow into it. And so he says, you shall have no other gods before me. Simple, right? It should just take us 5 minutes to get there. These simple words in a short sentence, yet inside this sentence lies the very foundation of life and wisdom for us. And so let's unpack together what these words mean, starting with that first clause, no other gods, is our first point for the morning. Non-religious historians, as they survey the breadth of world religion history, they will point to this quality as the greatest contribution in the religious landscape as a whole by the Jewish and eventually Christian theology. This idea of monotheism. Mono, of course, meaning one from the Greek, and theism meaning God. This idea of one God system. You know, it would not have been remarkable for someone in Egypt or Babylon at the time of the Exodus to have heard the story of Yahweh, that he was a great and powerful God. That was all the gods of that day marketed themselves as, great and powerful. It's hard to get worshipers for yourself as a god when you're weak and puny. Could you imagine the Tundra next year coming out and saying it has less horsepower than the competition and less ability to tow? It wouldn't sell very well. Neither do gods that don't do that. They would not have been too astonished to have read Exodus 20 verses 1 through 2, that God had rescued the Israelites out of Egypt. That's what gods do. But verse 3 would have confounded their minds, and in fact it confounds minds to this very day. It was common for gods to have highlights of their greatness written down across the known world and the stories told of it. All the cultures around the Israelites had their gods and their stories, and they championed their gods with them. But ultimately, the different gods were mostly just seen as beings on the same playing field, much like humanity. Sure, there are some gods that might be stronger than others, but they're all kind of mostly the same at the end of the day. The gods were part of the created order for most of these cultures. For many, they were simply just kind of superhuman creatures. But the Hebrew Bible that we read and we cherish has constantly pushed against this narrative. From the very first words of the Bible, we have pushed against it. It wasn't just the first commandment of the 10 that rejected this polytheism. It was the very first words of the Bible that rejected it as well. When it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That from the very beginning, there has been a God who stands alone above all of creation and sets in motion all of creation. That's deeply different from the other gods of that region. The other gods fought battles or spilled blood, and that's how the whole cosmos came into being for them. But there was no story of a God who set above all things as the creator of it all. So it was uniquely different. The call of Genesis 1:1 and Exodus 20:30 is that there is a God who is not created by human hands, as we sang this morning. That he reigns supremely above all of creation, including the little gods that are around you. You know, some scholars and thinkers have asked the question whether this verse is not a kind of roundabout way of acknowledging that Israel believed in the other gods actually existing similar to their God. But what the Bible consistently shows is that Israel mocks the other pagan gods as foolish and nothing more than stone and wood. There's this wonderfully fun story in the Bible in First Kings chapter 18, where Elijah, the prophet of the time, he challenges the pagan god Baal and his prophets of the Canaanites to a showdown against the true God. I encourage you to read it later. And as the priests of Baal are calling out to their false god, asking him to perform this miracle, perform this fire, Elijah's sitting over in the corner. He's just mocking them. He's saying, maybe your God has gone away to the bathroom. Maybe he can't hear you right now. Maybe he's asleep right now. Maybe that's why he's not answering you. Or consider Paul, even in the New Testament, as he writes the words we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 concerning idol food. He said, essentially, we all know that these idols that are worshipped in the temples are not real like our God. They are not of the same quality. Yet even still, Israel does fall away and it worships Baal, even though he's not real. That's why Elijah had to issue the challenge. They fall away time and time again to other gods. And we can all look at these primitive people and think to ourselves, well, that's all pretty silly. We obviously don't believe in many gods today. But perhaps we don't believe in other gods because our gods have taken less physical bodies and they're no longer called gods. Maybe they're just called goals today. Sure, Baal has gone out of style as a god to worship, but man, power is still very attractive. Maybe Dagon of the Philistines is not as cool as he once seemed, but dollar signs sure do have a lot of promise to him. And those things are fun to chase. The great reformer Martin Luther, I'm going to quote him briefly, said this. He said, having a God is not about putting him in your hand or putting him into a box. It's about what your heart is grasping on. So what do we gain by rejecting the other gods and worshiping Yahweh alone? Why would this command be so central? Why would this command be so important from God? I think the simplest answer, what you gain by doing this, is you gain clarity and objective truth. Clarity and objective truth. The exclusivity of God as the sole creator of the universe also grants him the status as the sole lawgiver of creation as well. It's a very basic rule in life. If you create the sandbox, you get to create the rules inside the sandbox too. The ancient world is full of stories in which the outcomes and the merits of humanity are not determined by a set of rules, but rather by the competition of the gods in the heavens. For example, the story of the Odyssey is back in mainstream thought once more because Christopher Nolan just released a movie about it on Friday. It's probably doing very well. The Odyssey, as grand and interesting it is, and it's a really interesting story, is ultimately nothing more than a story about the battle of the wills between two Greek gods and goddesses, Poseidon of the sea and Athena of wisdom. And their whole contest is to see which of them thinks Odysseus is right. Poseidon thinks Odysseus is a terrible person who needs to be punished. Athena thinks he is wonderful and should be celebrated. And the question is not, is Odysseus right or wrong? The question is, who of the gods is going to win the argument? Did you hear that? The fact that two gods would argue over whether a man's actions were virtuous or evil is precisely the underlying issue at hand in Greece the entire time. Ambiguity. We don't really know who's the right person. I don't really know what the virtuous man looks like. Maybe that's why they had to have so many philosophers think about it for so long. They couldn't figure it out. Maybe you are virtuous if one God says you are, and if another God says you're immoral, just find another God that you love. But what the 10 words do is they cut through all the noise. They begin profoundly by recognizing that there is one God. Listen to his voice. Don't let the voice of Baal or Dagon or money or power or Athena whisper sweet nothings into your ear and lead you astray as they often want to do. Let the voice of the true God guide you through this life in wisdom. Without this first command here, the other 9 are just good suggestions. It is the Jenga block that cannot be removed. And look, God recognizes there's always going to be other things that are fighting for our interest. And there will always be ground that we are willing to give up in our hearts to lesser things. And so he makes it explicitly clear in the most ambiguous way what the type of relationship he is actually after in the second half of this sentence when he says, before me. Their second point, before me. This phrase in Hebrew, if you care to know, is this phrase called al-panai. It is an importantly ambiguous and multifaceted phrase. The al of the phrase is merely a prepositional marker, which for those in grammar school know exactly what that means. It just means location. What is this thing in relationship to the other thing? With panai meaning literally your face. And so it can be translated as it is here in the ESV as before me or before my face, meaning don't put anything in my face or don't make me watch something that I don't want to see happen. But the tricky thing about this word all is that it's very contextual. You figure out its meaning based on the words around it in the sentence and on paragraphs to give you clues about it. For example, in the story of David later on in the Bible, there's this scene where he's told an army is rising up against you. It is coming up against your face. It's the same phrase used right here in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. But it's translated as the army coming up against your face because the context around it shows, hey, there's some opposition here. Armies don't usually rise up to come shake you. But uniquely, none of that added context is here, which means really any interpretation of the word is up for grabs. It could be translated as have nothing next to me, as in something co-equal to me. Or have nothing besides me, meaning don't let anything replace me, or have nothing against me as hostile. And here's what I think Moses and the biblical writers are doing here. I think the ambiguity is by design. I think God wants us to explore in this verse the multifaceted ways in which lesser gods can try to eke out inches and positions in our heart in the existence next to the real God that should be there. There's a popular phrase in sports, particularly football. It's attributed to a lot of people. It's been used over and over, but it's just very simple. It says faith, family, and football. It gets thrown into other things as well. Faith, family, and, I don't know, crock pot baking. Some super spiritual commentators will add the declarative line, in that order. So you know they're serious. And what they're doing is good. They're trying to say there is an order and a hierarchy about what should be most important in the athlete's life, and it shouldn't be that the sport is the most important thing. But the reality that seems to be screaming to me when I read passages like Exodus 20 is this, is how dare we put anything else in the same sentence as God? God is the only one who can occupy the sacred space of our hearts. He will share that with no one. Take the ands out. This is why Jesus can say the radical thing he says in Luke chapter 14, verse 26. It's on the screen for you. That if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brother and sister, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Does Jesus literally want you to hate your parents? No, that he would be violating the Ten Commandments. But our relationship with God should be so unequivocal in intensity and pursuit in our lives that it should be laughable to include anything else in the sentence with God. It is only God alone. Some of us look at that language and hear those kind of things from God and think to themselves, and that's why I don't want anything to do with him. Oprah Winfrey is very famously said in her life, she heard God described in a church sermon one day as a jealous God, and that's what turned her off to God. A God who's jealous, that sounds petty. But God's jealousy becomes completely rational when we understand in light of the type of relationship he is after with us. I want you to hear again the words of Exodus 20, verse 2. It said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. The foundation of the relationship that God desires to have with Israel is based on this. You were once an enslaved people in a hostile land, and I rescued you out of there for a relationship with me. I am not just God, I am your God. And you are my people. God is not looking for more people to barbecue oxen on his behalf. He is looking for a people to covenant with, to be in actual relationship with. This phrase, I am your God and you are my people, it comes so often in the Old Testament. It's kind of the primary way, that God describes the relationship and identity he has with his people in Israel. But it's an echo in a passage of Scripture that you might not expect. It comes from Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 3. It's a very famous passage, maybe you heard at a wedding. It says, I am my beloved's. My beloved is mine. God is communicating like the engaged couple of Song of Solomon, that there is a deep love between himself and his people that transcends other relationships. Now imagine with me for a moment an actual marriage relationship. That if we treated it the same way we often treat our relationship with a husband comes home from work one day to his loving wife. He walks in holding the hand of another woman. He tells his wife how much he loves her and he enjoys her and all the fun they have together and all the blessings he gets from her life. But he's recently met someone new who also fills him with joy and excitement. And he tells his wife, hey, look, don't worry about this. Like, this is not going to change anything between you and me here. Like, this is just going to add to the love going on in this house. It's going to be great. And when you watch the 6 o'clock news that night and you see that woman chasing that man with a frying pan, beating him senseless in the front yard, no one in their right mind is going to look at that and say, gosh, what a petty and insecure woman. I can't believe she would just freak out and make such a fuss over a small little issue like that. Truly, jealousy just makes her look small. In the same way, that woman would beat that man worse than Tiger Woods' wife beat him. God is not interested in sharing our affections. He's not interested in sharing our affections with lesser. Throughout the Bible, we see time and time again a pattern that when a man takes multiple wives, he only finds long-term trouble. Read the patriarch. When a people take on multiple gods, they only find long-term struggles. Just read the Bible. Why do we think we would be any different from thousands of years of history? As we explore these commandments each week, one of the exercises I like for us to kind of undertake at the end is to turn the commandment over in our minds. These commandments, particularly the negative ones, they can be rather narrow in their original words. But I think when we turn them over, we can get kind of a greater expanse of the wisdom that's going on, and we can explore it from a different angle. And so with that said, let's flip over the commands, our last point of the day. If the commandment says, do not have any other gods before me, then how do we flip that command? It might be a little difficult. It's kind of one of the harder ones to start with. How do you flip? How about have only the Lord in your life? But what does that actually mean? The biblical authors were actually fascinated with that question. In fact, Moses himself wrote extensively on that question. Much of the early part of Deuteronomy is spent addressing the question, how do we live out the first commandment? And Moses has many answers for us. One I think is particularly helpful. It comes from Deuteronomy 13, verse 4. He says, you shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice. And you shall serve him and hold fast to him. Moses gives this command to the people as an antidote for how to combat false prophets. He says, when people seek to lead you astray from God, you hold fast to the Lord and you follow him, that you might remain safe in him. So how do we keep no other gods before him? By holding fast to his word and following his command. As we said last week, Jesus told us, if you love me, you will keep my command. It's interesting, Jesus actually makes a similar type of statement in the Gospels. That God incarnate calls us into relationship with him. He says this in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. He says that if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. In Jesus comes the booming voice of God once more. Do you want to find life? Find it by putting to death the things of this world in your heart and following after me in new life. And here's a great guard at the end that the biblical authors give us to actually live this out. I want you to hear once more the words of Moses coming from Deuteronomy. This is from chapter 6, verse 12 through 14. Moses says, then take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God, you shall fear him, you shall serve. And by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people around you. You see, Moses, as he thought about the people going into the new land, he says, hey, there's going to be an opportunity for you to forget some. There's going to be an opportunity for you to forget the Red Sea. There's going to be an opportunity to forget the manna. There's going to be an opportunity for you to forget time and time again how the Lord has rescued you. You see, when Moses thought about the people going into the land to dwell, he wasn't concerned about the other gods being more appealing or more powerful than Yahweh. It was his concern that Israel would forget all that their God had done in them. You see, the starting place in breaking the first command is not the allure of the other idols. We often think, oh, the other gods just seem more appealing. It's the forgetfulness of our own hearts. As in the same way with infidelity, the starting place is not the attractive other person, it's the fact you forgot the beauty of your spouse. We begin to believe that it was us or some other power that allowed us to prosper and be successful. We gravitate to those things because we lose sight of reality. The thundering voice of heaven just becomes mere background noise. So how do you keep your heart right? By remembering God's work in your life consistently, by thanking God for all the things and making the regular practice of thanking him for all the things big and small in your life. When we keep God on our lips, it is hard to get him off of our minds and nearly impossible for us to give up seat for him in our hearts. So practice thankfulness. I guarantee you'll be thankful you did. You shall have no other gods before me. It's the first. It's the first in order, and perhaps it's the first in importance. It is foundational. It is hard to set because there are so many things in our life that are vying for the place that only belongs to God. Our own egos oftentimes are the hardest thing to move. But it's only when we set God as the cornerstone of all wisdom and guidance in our lives that we can actually flourish in the good. Follow after God and let him continue to lead you down the path of wisdom that we'll find in these 10 words. My main thought for us this morning is this: a life built on anything less than God alone is a life that is waiting to fall. So what do we do? As steady followers here at Titus, I challenge you this way. I want you to combat the forgetfulness of your own heart. I want you to commit to a daily point of thanksgiving, of talking to God in thanksgiving, even maybe before you look at your phone. That before the noise of the world enters your mind, constantly reflect on just one thing from the day before that you are thankful for the Lord doing in your life. Could you find one thing from yesterday that you're thankful for God for? I guarantee you could if you looked long enough. I guarantee you'd find a lot more than one. As a family blessing, I challenge you to look closely at what your family structure prioritizes when conflicts arise. I want you to safeguard family worship. This is the most important thing you're doing this week right now. I want you to prioritize rest and church community against the lesser cultural gods of endless achievement, performance, and busyness. As a community light, we always strive to be people who are a light in our community. When the culture plays Jenga with ethics this week, and they probably will, live out a life where your love, integrity, and charity are visible anchors of your devotion to Christ. Let your neighbors see that your kindness isn't arbitrary or shifting, but it's built on the unchanging character of God. When they ask you, man, why are you so kind? It's not, well, I just think it's nice for society for me to be kind to people. It is that the God of the universe has changed my heart. And he is my firm foundation. His kindness is where I find me. Lastly, is a faith multiplier. In your relationships this week, in your conversation, I challenge you to ask diagnostic questions rather than just giving lectures. When someone is stressed or anxious around you, and I guarantee there's somebody, I want to offer you a question for them. What is the thing you are most afraid of losing right now? What is the thing you're most afraid of losing? And I want you to use that as a guide to help them see the lesser gods they're chasing. Maybe it's power. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's a love from somebody else. What is the thing you are terrified of losing right now? As we close our eyes and we quiet our hearts before the Lord, let's move from just thinking about these truths to letting them search us. And we've looked at the Jenga tower of our culture, and if we're honest, we can see places where we've allowed our own hearts to become cluttered with lesser gods and probably even pull a few blocks away. God doesn't ask for our undivided devotion to restrict us, but to protect the relationship that He rescued us from. So in these next few moments of quiet, let us be completely honest with Him. Let's ask the Holy Spirit to show our hearts are truly grasping onto today. And invite the one true God back into the sacred solo space that He deserves.